Hey gang, the Assassin's Creed franchise has been around for over 15 years, and despite being based around assassins, it has yet to have a game based in Japan, a place where ninja have come to be known worldwide for their abilities as assassins. Till now. Assassin's Creed Valhalla had Norsemen in Norway. Assassin's Creed 3 was based in the United States colonies and had a half English, half Mohawk protagonist. Assassin's Creed 2 was based out of Italy, with the main character hailing from Florence. And Mirage would have a protagonist born in Samarra, Iraq, and would do his assassinationing in Baghdad. So, with the new game being based out of the Warring States period of Japan, my immediate thought was you'd have a ninja under maybe Hattori Hanzo. But maybe we could also see a ninja out of some other kind of major ninja clan like the Koga. And Ubisoft has been known for taking liberties with making characters out of thin air for their stories, so maybe they would take a inspiration to make a unique ninja clan that's closer to the Christian daimyos, so that you could justify having that interaction where they fight against the Templars, which are the big bad guys in the story. So where would our new protagonist hail from in this new Assassin's Creed series? Not Japan, apparently. Because nothing says staying hidden and out of sight to assassinate enemies like being a full head taller than everybody else and be the only black man in all of Japan. They chose a black man that was in records from the 1500s who had no recorded name before being given one by Oda Nobunaga, who was fascinated by his skin color and would ask the Jesuit missionaries that he was with if they could have him. His name, Yasuke, is something that would live on through history as a minor footnote in the story of some much greater individual by the name of Oda Nobunaga. So with this video, let's go over some of the major points where Ubisoft decided to slight any and every Japanese man of the era to instead use some cultural appropriation to uplift a man that was basically a poorly documented footnote at the time. To start off with, folks that have been following anything with the whole Gamergate 2 drama would remember the name Sweet Baby Inc., a company made famous for losing their shit at a Brazilian man for making a list of games that they had worked on. Truly unforgivable things. Some folks would point out that this was probably Sweet Baby Inc. working with Ubisoft because they list Ubisoft as a company that they work with on their website. You would do well to remember that this particular company was founded by former Ubisoft employees. Now, companies would hire firms like Sweet Baby Inc. or SBI so that they could improve their company's ESG scores. ESG standing for environmental, social, and governance, which is a metric that investment companies are looking at these days. They basically say, I need this level of an ESG score at a company before I put my money into the company's stock, or if it's not public, just send investments in general. And while DEI companies like this would claim they're adding representation to games, by and large, they try and take as much liberty as they're permitted so that they can remake the game into whatever worldview that they have. Whether it's taking Pokemon Go to make every female character look like men, race-swapping characters in South of Midnight, or writing the awful dialogue that would see Suicide Squad mocked relentlessly. Now, this isn't limited to games either. The Witcher on Netflix would be infamous for ruining the story so that they could push a narrative that wasn't in the book series. For example, the show writer would say that she wanted to bring in people that weren't traditionally beautiful. As of recording, the worst example of this is a rendition of Romeo and Juliet starring Tom Holland and Francesca Amawuda Rivers. And this is being relentlessly mocked as Francesca is not someone that most people would call traditionally beautiful, especially compared to the last major female lead Tom Holland worked with in Zendaya, who was cast as MJ in Spider-Man. The people that flock to these companies are largely cultural arsonists. They want to burn something down so that they can rebuild it in their own worldview. And if they can't rebuild it in their own worldview, just burn it down and let's not worry about that in general at all. Now, I do want to be clear on one thing. A game cannot be ruined by hiring a DEI firm. all of these companies have to greenlight whatever work the DEI firm wants to give to them. So anytime you see some awful representation of terrible writing that's written by these companies, the company that hired them is responsible for that because they greenlit it, they approved it, they paid for it. And in this case, we see a game that's based in feudal Japan. Japan being an island where foreigners are not permitted to live there, where its population is over 99% Japanese. Even now, in 2024, Japan is over 97% Japanese. Now, a lot of writers do not like to have white males as the protagonist. A lot of people also consider to be Asian men to be white adjacent. One such writer, for example, is the senior writer for Assassin's Creed Shadows, Giles Armstrong. Now, if you agree with someone like Giles, you're probably watching this video and you're thinking, oh man, this is just some Asian guy that's upset that he didn't get his representation in the new Assassin's Creed game. And, well, buddy, this may come as a shock to you, but I'm not Asian. I'm actually a white dude. Now, I know that my weeb abilities make it so that I blend in very easily with my fellow Asians. Blend in so well, in fact, that I could possibly be a protagonist in the new Assassin's Creed. One might think that my ability to fool you would make me possibly a better candidate than Yasuke, an individual that was also known for his stealth and his massive ceremonial samurai armor. Now, to be fair to games journalists, IGN would help in discovering who Ubisoft hired as an expert on Japan. Sachi Schmidt-Hori is an associate professor at Dartmouth living in Canada. What is Sachi's area of expertise to make her an expert to talk about ninjas and the Warring States period in Japan? Her areas of expertise are pre-17th century Japanese language and literature, East Asian sociolinguistics, gender, sexuality, and negations of power. So let's read a little bit from Dartmouth's page where Sachi had written about what she wanted to represent her as a professor at Dartmouth. I am interested in investigating how gender, sexuality, corporality, and power are represented and negotiated in pre-17th century Japanese narratives and illustrations. My first book, Tales of Idolized Boys, Male Love in Medieval Japanese Narratives, is on medieval Shigo Monogatari, which is Buddhist acolyte tales, which often depict romantic relationships between Buddhist priests and adolescent boys. These tales challenge a host of normative and moral standards we, academics especially, internalize, including such ideas as sexual orientation, transgenerational sex, and sexual agency. So, in case you didn't catch that, she wrote a book on how monks were having sex with adolescent boys. She's a specialist in medieval Japanese pedophilia. And you can buy her book on Amazon for $25 US. Now, the Ubisoft DEI stuff aside, instead of making a fictional character like a lot of the other Assassin's Creed games did, they chose Yasuke. Why? Was Yasuke a powerful samurai under Nobunaga? No. He was a bargain bin retainer, which mostly meant he held Nobunaga's things. He would be permitted to carry Nobunaga's swords as a sword bearer. Extremely prestigious position, showed a lot of trust for an individual because you were letting them carry your weapons in your presence, where most people were not permitted to be within like a certain distance of you. But we have no records of him doing any actual real fighting. Now, to be fair, my understanding is you can be a retainer and a samurai, and folks would point out that Yasuke could be a samurai. It's just not documented well, except we have portraits of him just holding stuff like some basic retainer would be doing in the period. And we would see nothing on him receiving any land or titles so that you could chalk him up to any kind of nobility or samurai at the time. After Oda Nobunaga's death, he is sent out of the country. We really don't have a lot of information about him afterwards because he's just a footnote in someone else's story. He's not like a big character and is not even very documented very well. And after that, there's just not much to talk about in terms of history. He's just not a big figure. We would see a lot of comparisons to try and justify having Yasuke as the main character instead of a native in the region like it had been in pretty much every other Assassin's Creed game. One of the examples is Nioh has a main character named William Adams, and it's a white guy. Like, that's not a Japanese person. And like, well, that makes it so that it's totally okay for Yasuke to be the main character here. Now, first off, Nioh is a game where William Adams is chasing some alchemist to Japan to try and defeat demons and level up. And honestly, Nioh, I wanted to like that game. It pisses me off to no end. Like, I like some Souls games, but Nioh just, I can't do it. I cannot afford to break another control. So I just don't play that game. But it makes no attempt to try and tell history. It's just like a Souls-like game, and that's fine. Also, William Adams was a real person in history. He was granted the title of samurai in 1605 by the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. William Adams would also be known by the Japanese name Miura Anjin, meaning the pilot of Miura later in life. He's a ship's navigator, and after his death, his lordship would transfer to his son, Joseph Adams. Another example people would point at is the show on Hulu, Shogun. Spoiler alert, the main character for Shogun is based off of William Adams. And I haven't watched the show. I read the book way back in the day. My recollection of the book was that the story was mostly based around the cultural differences between the main character and Japanese culture, him learning those cultural differences and translations and how that would, how things could change in translation. Like that's my recollection of the book. I remember it being very good, but it's been like, Lord, 20 years. Another point would be Last Samurai, where people would point out at Tom Cruise being a samurai in Japan. And in this case, it'd be a story of a white guy from America that would go to Japan, and he would side with the shogun's forces in the Boshin War, which is where Imperial Japan and the shogunate fought for supremacy. And at the end, the samurai would be defeated, and the main character, Tom Cruise, would end up getting honored by the state, even though he had fought against them in the war. And on this point, you got me. There's no white man from America that did any of that. It was a white man from France named Jules Bernet. Jules Bernet was ordered to return to France at the breakout of the Boshin War. He would refuse to return to France and would instead side with the Tokugawa shogunate and later the Republic of Ezo. He would be a commander and fight in the famous Battle of Hakodate. And after their defeat, he would escape and he would be captured by French forces, where he was arrested and sent back to France for violating his orders to return and fighting against the Japanese. After being punished in France, he would eventually go back to Japan, and he was given 3 swords by Yoshinobu Tokugawa, who was a member of the Tokugawa family that sided with the emperor. Apparently his descendants still have those swords, which is a pretty cool fact. Another aspect from some folks would be that Assassin's Creed doesn't always use people from where the games are based. The big proof of this was in Assassin's Creed Black Flag, where you play as a Welshman. And as a heads up, the golden age of piracy, those ships they were using there, those are European ships. They are going to be built, crewed, and commanded mostly by Europeans. There is an example of a famous pirate that was born in the Caribbean, Barbados in particular. He is my personal favorite of the era, not because he's a good pirate, but because he was just so goddamn bad at it. His name was Stade Bonnet, and as you can see, he's a very, very white guy despite being born in the Caribbean. He's super bad at everything. You should look him up sometime. Now, with all the history out of the way, does this mean that the game is going to sell well or not? Some folks would point out at the Ubisoft stock and show that it had been in decline, and it was a market reaction to Yasuke being the main character. However, the week that they released this trailer was also a week where they put out a financial report where they had bad guidance, and that generally, when you get bad guidance in a quarterly report or biannual report, your stock generally goes down because traditional investors will shed at least some of it. And whenever you look at stock, don't look at like 5 days, because that's like your default. It's like the 5-day graph on a stock to see how it's performing. If we look at the past year, you can see that they kind of suck. And if we look at their stock from an all-time perspective, it looks like they peaked before COVID. And When every other entertainment company had their stock shoot up over COVID, Ubisoft is the first games chart I've seen that actually lost value during COVID. Now, they got a couple games coming out soon. They've got this, Shadows, coming out, and they have the new Star Wars game that they're working on that looks really terrible. The main character has a chin that would make the Habsburg dynasty jealous. But with an Assassin's Creed game, as long as the gameplay is good, people will probably buy it. All the history that they're trying to tell there could be a total joke. But if the gameplay is good, then they're still going to play it. Most folks can ignore a bad story as long as the gameplay is good. Personal example for me is Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. The story is awful. It is a low C tier anime story at best. But the gameplay's fun, so you can largely just ignore that. So if the gameplay in Assassin's Creed is good, and the story is a total joke, it should still sell fine. A bad story won't kill a good game, but a bad story can make a bad game far, far worse. So how much are they going to sell this new Assassin's Creed title for? Starts at $70 all the way up to $130 for the Ultimate Edition. This is the truly amazing bullshit story out of Ubisoft these days. They are trying to funnel people so hard into this Ubisoft Plus plan for $18 a month so that you subscribe and forget about the subscription. Basically, their whole existence is people thinking that, or hoping that people will think that they're getting a good deal in not spending $130 to just put their credit card on file with Ubisoft. And I hope this game fails. I hope all of Ubisoft's games fail on the pricing model alone. I hate this shit and I do not want to see it in my industry. But hey, if you pay at least $110 or sign up for the subscription service, you get the season's pass. And with that, you get a bonus quest on day one. I'm not exactly sure what that quest is going to look like, but if I'm going to make some assumptions based on their cultural expert, Sachi Schmidt-Hori, I get a feeling it's going to be a quest to find people. But that's all I've got to say on this for the moment. Sorry to the Japanese fans of the franchise for you getting dicked out of your time in the sun, or shadow in this case. And if you enjoyed the video, if you give it a like, comment, or a sub, it'd go a long way for me because I'm pretty new to the space. And thanks for your time, and I hope to see you again in a future video. Thanks.